Hello, good night.
Good
Good night to the
evening.
guests.
Good evening, evening.
Good night to those viewing this program. When I say good night, but I know in many cultures, though, we are just an evening. But welcome to everyone. But before we start, I just want to recognize the sponsors of the program: Jail Professional Solutions Inc., Gem FM carrying the program on FM radio out of Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAU.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
As our guest tonight, we have Mr. Michael Jessamy, an experienced heritage assets manager, and we also have attorney at law, Rosana John. Aisha?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the
Good
show.
evening.
Before we proceed, I would just like to wish all the fathers listening and everyone who plays a father role happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Lane is a bit under the weather, so I will be the one in control of the show this evening. So, I hope that we have a productive show. And so
Looking
this
forward.
evening we'll be speaking about the dilapidated buildings in Grenada. So before we start, I will read. Dilapidated buildings and structures have are a disgusting feature of the Grenadian landscape. They have been seen all over the town of St. George, in Grenville, and in other cities in suburban and rural areas. They pose a threat to the safety of citizens and visitors, as was manifested in St. Andrews a few years ago when a falling wall caused the death of an unsuspecting citizen. Where these dilapidated buildings do not pose a threat a threat of death or injury from falling derbies, they still serve as sanctuaries to vagrants and through such use pose fire and health risks. Tonight, we will discuss with our guests the extent, possible causes, implications, and what can be done about the problem of dilapidated and abandoned structures in Grenada. So, good evening, Mr. Jessamy and Ms. John. I'm so happy to have you both on the program this evening. So, before
Good
we
evening.
just get
Thank
into
you.
it, I would like for both of you just to give a brief introduction to our audience and let them know who you are.
Ladies first.
Well, sure.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. I am Rosana John, and I'm an attorney at law. My, I guess, specialty is real estate and also environmental law. That's where my master's degree is. So you may think that, an environmental lawyer, why is she on a program about dilapidated buildings? But environmental issues tend to be classed into two main categories: brown issues and green issues. Most of us are familiar with the green issues, which is the climate change, the biodiversity loss, and those things that deal with the natural environment. But environmental law also deals with brown issues, the less attractive ones, such as sanitation issues, things like garbage disposal, and things like dilapidated buildings. So those two fall under the general environmental ambit. So I'll be speaking today about the legal responses that are currently available in Grenada to address dilapidated buildings.
Thank you so much, Ms. John. Mr. Jessamy.
I'm Michael Jessamy. I spent some time at the National Museum, but I also, for years, worked closely with physical planning department on a committee called Natural and Cultural Heritage Advisory Body. I also worked with the national parks in Grenada, agriculture, and then end up with tourism. I did quite a bit. We tend to look at the environment sometimes only as the natural aspects or whether it's garbage disposal and so forth. but we also have the as-built environment, the environment created by man. And it's an area that is somewhat very, very weak and challenging in Grenada. So I have been trying to grapple with this for almost 40 years. You have both tangible, intangible, movable, immovable. So all those things, whether it's artifacts or whether it's bottles, So that has been, my forte for the last 40 years.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jessamy. So, as the audience can see, we have a very experienced panel this evening, and so we will just jump right into it. Rosana, I'd like to start with you. We're attorneys, so we like to start with definitions. Just this doesn't have to be a legal or a strict definition, but as an overview, what would be defined as a dilapidated building?
Well, I was looking at the Physical Planning and Development Act, and there is no definition in there. They refer to ruinous and dilapidated, but in terms of an actual definition, I did not find one in our legislation.
Mr. Jessamy, based on your experience, what can you tell us about what is considered as a dilapidated building?
Well, we don't really. What you look at a building in terms of the state of conservation. So whether it's good or bad, because things are also protected as a ruin. Depends on the whole historical background. So we look at the entire structure. Yeah. So if the structure when it's faulty, then we tend to look at what intervention that is needed. But the whole thing is regarded as historic.
Okay, thank you. So for the purposes of our show this evening, can I fairly say that a dilapidated building is one where it would not necessarily be fit for, let's say, the purpose or inhabitants or whatever the case may be?
Yes,
Because
you can.
on the face of it, it's an eyesore.
Mm-hmm.
On the
And
face,
dangerous. Yeah.
and dangerous to persons
Yeah.
if that they were to enter it.
Yeah.
Very well. So, Ms. John, given your background in environmental law and real estate, and I think that's a very important background to have, what is the state of affairs in Grenada right now? How are things looking in relation to dilapidated buildings, and are we in danger?
Well, I cannot speak about the actual physical state of things. I can speak about the legal aspect in terms of legal responses. So in terms of dilapidated buildings, is the library considered, the public library considered a dilapidated building? Is the Parliament building considered a dilapidated building? Is the former Governor General's house considered a dilapidated building? These are some areas for discussion. Are they posing any danger? So that's perhaps a different discussion. So these are some of those that stand out to me, but I am not in a position to comment on the state of buildings in Grenada. What I can say is that we do have the laws on the books to address it. Whether we have enforcement is a different question. So it's not a case that Grenada has no regulation and it's the wild, wild west. So that is what I can comment on. So I don't know if we want to speak about the problem a little more and then speak about the legal aspects. Up to you.
Sure, no problem at all. Go,
All
Mr.
right.
Justin, wanted to come
Yeah,
in.
I can shed some light on this. You see, sometimes we are happy, and with nostalgia, we tend to say, Grenada, historic Grenada, rich cultural heritage, and those sort of things like that, which is quite good. However, whether we are happy because some things or some buildings have passed, let's say, 100 years, whether some building has some architectural significance, it's another story. A country could declare something as historic or not to declare. So there's no hard and fast rule that pin a country that you must declare something as historic. However, what happened is that Grenada has been the site. Grenada have been a country that has been looked at for quite some years, and there are even books, written, "The Prettiest Town in the Caribbean," by St. George's, which is fish scale roof tiles, the enchanting harbor, and you name it. So for centuries. However, again, we had the hurricanes, and Ivan really hit us hard, where we had to try and rip and scrape and whatever material you could put your hands on to repair roofs and so forth. But people really, enjoy coming into the harbor or going to the fort and looking down and see all the nice red fish scale tile roofs building. Yes, you will say it is the obligation of the state to keep those things in them, and preserve it for the future generation. We can say this especially from 1998, after Grenada signed up to the UNESCO Convention, saying that yes, we will preserve our cultural heritage. Because our heritage is something that is from patrimonial and inheritance here. So we inherited some things. Our heritage is the granite tank, the natural, Le Cantoine, natural, but we also have the man-made, which is our buildings and so forth. So we agreed, yes, that we are going to preserve. And even later on, we said that by 2020, we are going to preserve 20% or 25% of our terrestrial and marine resources. In 2001, 2002, 2003, we started the process of looking at the fortified system of St. George's as a possible World Heritage listing. But then came Ivan, and apparently maybe our powders got wet. We have not really made much stride. Yes, we had a dossier, and the dossier, the first draft that went to UNESCO, it had a period of some 10 years. We have passed that period now in 2025. So you're looking at 2003, 2004, now in 2025. So we are outside of that period when we agree that, yes, we will look at St. George's and its historical fortifications. Why? Because if we want to look at Fort George is not just Fort George, but Fort George is a market square, the Plaza de Armas. So up to the 1990s, that's where we still have all the military parades and so forth, Remembrance Day and so forth. We had the cenotaph, which is now at the Botanical Gardens. Fort George is also the entire financial complex because it was the Ordnance Department. As a matter of fact, it was one of the biggest one in the entire Caribbean, to the extent that they look at making, or the whole idea was to make the town of St. George a naval station, but that fell through with the wars that subsided. But we continue in that vein, and people continue to paint the buildings nice. We continue to keep the bricks form and so. But sad to say, we did not enact the enabling laws to continue with those kind of things. So over the years, we had the Tricentennial 2010, and looking at Fort George, the town around Fort George, but we are only able to say list say 20-something buildings. Then we extended to 34. But within that listing of buildings proposed to be declared as National Heritage Assets, only 4 sites to date has been declared. Fort George, Fort Matthew, and Frederick, and then Tricentennial Park, that is the area over the tunnel. And that was done to mark 300 years of the town of St. George around Fort George.
So, Mr. Jessamy, you're essentially speaking about the preservation, particularly of historical buildings in Grenada, and more specifically in the town of St. George's.
In the town of St. George. So in the town of St. George, so what we did was that we had a proposed conservation zone, and within that conservation zone that took in different areas, which is high, which is contributing, which is low. So we have areas like Fort George going right up to Government House, as you mentioned. However, we had to extend it a bit to take in the entire compound. So that heritage conservation zone or map was accepted by cabinet, but not planned or instituted into law. Why is it important? The very buildings within the town, if they're identified within that conservation zone, then we have an obligation to do something, to stabilize them, find out who are the owners, what can be done in terms of whether we can have, say, an incentive program in terms of tax rebates and so forth. So a program of preservation and conservation could be carried out. That again too is still on the books. And what we found out again too is that you have a number of laws and a number of laws between various institutions, and there's no coordination. And that's
Yeah, but if I may come in, Mr. Jessamy, I think what she's trying to direct your mind to is beyond the historical buildings.
Yes.
What we refer to as abandoned buildings. And I think we could say abandoned, dilapidated, that's an ordinary word. Everybody.
Yeah, but you will say too that the historic buildings, or the signatory buildings that comprise the town. So like you mentioned earlier on, York House.
Yes, I'm aware of that. But what we try to identify
is there are other buildings within. Yes, there are other buildings with.
Just give me a minute. The problem of these abandoned buildings, and
yes,
for it, I know you know the whole of Grenada very well, and it is an eyesore. Not only in the town of St. George, there's a building opposite Food Fair, for example. You know that building we speak of?
Very well, yeah.
Is that a historical building?
No, that building was stopped by the late Derek Knights because of again some legal issues, I guess. So that building again,
it is not a historical building, but it is an abandoned building.
It's abandoned.
It is dilapidated.
Building. Yes.
So that's what we want to focus on, and to get your experience and expertise. How many buildings as that you believe exists in St. George's? I know you walked where you walked. If there was ever an inventory taken as to identify how many buildings, including historical buildings, which could be identified as dilapidated or abandoned.
What I said to you is that we, over the years, but that ended around 2012, 2015 there, but we had a kind of a rough inventory as to all the building stock within the town. Even after Ivan, we had an assessment as well too. To date, I cannot tell you, off my head, how many buildings that we have actually identified. But every building will be given a status. So whether it's abandoned, whether it's a priority building, whether it's in a state of good or bad conservation, all those buildings have been identified. However, we have not completed an inventory of the town and an inventory of Grenada. So presently,
how many are identified in the town?
At that time, we had about over 300 and some buildings we identified, all buildings within the town. Those were contributing.
And that was how many years ago?
That was, as I said, since around 2011, 2010. We finished that first one, yeah.
So I guess we can extrapolate from that. If that is just in the tongue alone, then we know we have a problem in Grenada as a whole.
Yes, we do.
I certainly agree with Mr. Layne, and I'm sure Ms. John would agree as well. So I want to take us to the legal framework governing these buildings. So Rosana, I think this is your area of expertise, and you'll be able to give us some guidance this evening. So I would like for you to tell us, what are the current laws governing the management or the regulation of these dilapidated buildings in Grenada? And just tell us more about the laws.
Okay, so there are two main pieces of legislation that cover this area. So the most direct one is the Physical Planning and Development Control Act of 2016. And then there's the Public Health Act. So those two most directly deal with it. The Physical Planning Act, actually in Part 5, specifically deals with dilapidated buildings. And it uses a very defined phrase. So where it says seriously detrimental to the amenities of the neighborhood. So once a building is said to be ruinous is the term they use, or dilapidated, and is seriously detrimental to the amenities of the neighborhood, then the Physical Planning Act, it speaks to the minister. So that is the minister responsible for physical planning. I took a quick look at the government website, and if it's up to date, it seems that the Prime Minister is still the minister responsible for infrastructure. So he, on the advice of the Physical Planning and Development Authority, have the power to issue notices to owners of buildings that are in a dilapidated state. And if the owner cannot be found, then they can put a physical notice on the building saying that, this building has to be repaired, it is a danger to the neighborhood, and so forth. So that is if the the owners of the building cannot be found. You put the notice. And then it goes further that the Physical Planning and Development Control Authority has the power to actually effect repairs on the building. It has the power to demolish, but the more curious one is the one about they can effect the repairs themselves, and then the cost of doing so is now a debt owed by the owner of the building. And it has the same powers under the Conveyancing and Property Act. So it's like a mortgage. So if it's a charge on the property, so to say, and if it is not discharged, they have the power to actually sell the building. So it's a very powerful provision that I don't believe is being enforced. So the curious thing is, because I was looking at the Building Act in Jamaica, that one, the public has the ability to directly interface with the Physical Planning Authority there and actually complain about things. I was looking at ours, and it's not as straightforward. It seems to be inferred that the Physical Planning and Development Authority should be inspecting and monitoring buildings in Grenada, and they should be the one telling the minister, and then the minister issues the notice. So there's this implied duty of monitoring. And I don't think that's happening at all. I don't know if there's the resources for that. That's just my personal opinion, that they're a bit overwhelmed already as it is, and don't have the ability to be going around Grenada, inspecting and looking at the state of buildings in different places. So unfortunately, it is only when things go wrong that that we are taking steps. So we don't have that preventative mentality of going around inspecting buildings, what is ruinous, what is not. So in terms of there is that power on the books. Also under the Public Health Act, there's a sanitation authority on paper. I cannot say that I'm aware of that they're actually sitting. The chief medical officer is supposed to be the chairperson of that act, of that sanitation authority, and they have the ability to deal with nuisances. And the definition of a nuisance is broad enough to capture the issues of dilapidated buildings, but I am not aware of that authority being in place or being active. I could be wrong. I'm just saying I am not aware of that. So I think we have the necessary laws. We have them on the books. It's just a matter of enforcement is, in my personal view, the issue. That is just not a priority issue until something goes wrong.
Thank you.
Just to make a quick comment there about the Physical Planning Act. What happened is that within the physical planning, within that act, you'll see the act make provision for a committee called the Natural and Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee. And that committee is composed of various organizations like the Indian Association, the National Trust, the Forestry Department, and so forth. But what happened too is that for some years now, that body has not been reactivated. We also have some little gray areas as to whether that committee ready is to recommend and suggest. So it's a committee of the physical planning, but it cannot take any draconian, if I want to use that word, strong word, measures. But go out there, look at the state of the buildings within the town or within Grenada, and then make the recommendation for a course of action to the physical planning. So that grouping needs to be reactivated, needs to address the issue as to how can we preserve these buildings, what course of action. We also have bodies like the National Trust, which in some countries, they too will look at buildings like that, and then they go about preserving them. But within the same Physical Planning Act, we have some week schedule or schedules within it to say, all right, when the trust goes out or when the physical planning goes out, within 90 days, they slap a preservation or conservation order, and they have to find the owner, or the owner supposed to respond, and the course of action that should be taken. Those little things are somewhat well, I don't know whether it is sketchy or absent, from the Physical Planning Act. Again, to the whole interactions of the various groups, that again to need to be given some attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jessamy. So I just wanted to tie in both of the perspectives, on the legal perspective and also on the cultural slash heritage perspective. And what I wanted
Uh-huh.
to ask you, Mr.
Mm,
Jessamy, how do we navigate situations if a building, it's culturally significant, it's
mhm.
historically significant, but it's structurally unsafe? How do we preserve, but without compromising the health and safety of persons in our society?
All right. In the first instance, what the physical planning, or if there is a national inventory or listing. So, like, I don't know whether you recall, years ago there was some protests against a business place in town trying to paint the building in a particular color, and people rose up in arms and say that should not happen. The legal uh, end of all that was that there is not a list, there's not a zone, so you can't say that this building is not conforming to that zone. So we have to look at that. We have to look at how maybe within the system we have some kind of both management and legislative. Because to date, sometimes the question is asked, who is actually responsible for the day-to-day affairs or running of the town in the absence of bodies like district board and so forth. So this is a great area that sometimes outside of Grenada put us in a lot of hot water, because what do you have? Is it a municipality or metropolitan, and those sort of things? So we need to look at how can we address that. What is the steps? So if you have building that needs attention, how can we maybe pull them down, but at the same time using, like, for instance, Hubbard's, like for instance, Hubbard's had a fire. That building, it was gutted, it was knocked down, but then you had a readaptive building that replaced it. So how can we do that? How can we give those building a new life, valorization? So all those things needs to be addressed.
Certainly, Mr. Jessamy. So based on what you said previously, under the Physical Planning Act, you mentioned that there is provision for a national and cultural heritage advisory committee.
Yes, yes.
I suspect that if such committee is formed, that committee would be able to tackle some of these issues and would be able to identify the particular places, and they would be able to create this national inventory that is needed.
Definitely. But we also have other quasi or quasi or quango bodies like the National Trust as well too, that has responsibility for doing things like that. Whether the support from the various administration is there is another story. We know that is a kind of an area that we're really begging for some attention, because again too, we can raise funds not only locally but internationally once you have the proper management, legislative systems and institutions in place. And that is the challenge. We have yet to really form that kind of overarching or that institution that will link all the various bodies, the engineers, the physical planning. So you have both private and public. So we need those things like that.
I understand. So, Rosanna, you spoke briefly about the sanitary authority, and as it is now, you stated that you're not 100% sure whether or not Grenada has actually convened the authority. Based on my research, I haven't seen anything as either, so I'm not sure as well. But I just wanted to jump in a little bit more on their powers. So I was also inspecting the act, and I realized that the authority can inspect. Not only can they inspect, but they can also receive complaints. So if the authority existed, then persons could have come and made complaints to the authority, and they would be able to do their investigations. But what I'm curious about, and this might take us into a bit of property law. So I am the owner of a building, and my building is dilapidated. The authority serves me notice, but I'm in the States and haven't been back in Grenada in years. The authority goes in and they fix my building, and I come back to Grenada. What happens? Is it that they would serve me notice that, listen, you have to pay back for this service that we did in fixing this building, or Further, are these buildings sometimes just deemed unlivable, or perhaps they can't be fixed? What happens there? What does the provisions of the law makes in relation to this?
Okay, so this is more under the Physical Planning Act rather than the public health one. So they issue the notice. So where the owner cannot be found, the notice is issued on the building, given a specific amount of time to the owner to come forth. The owner doesn't come forth. In the perfect society, the authority has the funds and effects the repairs. And I'm not exactly sure in terms of the actual mechanics of how they will find the person when they're actually back, but just in terms of just theory, that person now owes the government a debt. Well, not the government, because the authority is separate from the government, it's a statutory body. But what I suspect in terms of how it could be caught is if you try to sell or transfer the property, because it is now a charge on the property, and they say in the same way as in the Conveyancing and North Property Act. So I'm not sure if some sort of charge is actually registered in the Deeds and Land Registry. So it's the act. I can't recall the exact provision, but they reference the Conveyancing and North Property Act and say that charge has the same force as a mortgage. So I imagine if that is the case, it has to be recorded. And so if you try to sell or transfer, the property is inherited anyway. So any sort of transfer, that is when it would really be caught that, hey, there's a debt owed here and this property cannot be transferred. So that's where I see that the true teeth would come up. But in the day-to-day dealings, I don't see how the person would be quote unquote caught for not paying the debt.
With debt owed to them.
Well, what's supposed to happen, as you rightfully said, in the true sense of everything, that is where you have other organizations or institutions like the National Trust that should, be involved by government, so that when you create that list, then that building now is held in trust. But again, we are not really, we have not given the National Trust nothing over the years. Although the trust had some challenges, we have to admit as well too. But that kind of support and that kind of working with the various stakeholders, that has not been happening. So the body, as I said, is in physical planning. It's there as recommendations and suggestions, but whether it is actually carried out is a different ballgame.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Can I ask Mr. Jessamy a question?
Sure.
I'm not sure if I heard correctly. That advisory body is constituted or is not constituted?
It's not. For the last few years, yes.
Okay. Okay.
But
okay, I just took a quick look and I saw that they have a lot of advisory powers that they can do with the list and so forth.
Yes. But and again, too, as I said, within that you have organizations like the Willie Renner Foundation, Grenada National Trust, the engineers, the architect, the head of physical planning, you name it. It's the forestry department. It is a very strong committee. But then again, too, it's the same thing. We have committees, but at the end of the day, who is responsible for bedding the cat? That is a great area that needs to be, addressed. Or if we have that list drawn up, so this is a national list. So you have listed buildings. And if you have listed buildings, you must have listed buildings consent. So just so a building is ruinous, dilapidated, you put on it, listed building. You try to find out who the owners are. If they fail to respond within that given period, then you execute your order. But again, all those little bits and pieces, I guess we need to address as we try to move forward.
Rosana, I'm curious. Can the government of Grenada compulsory acquire dilapidated buildings?
I don't see why not. Once you come within the Land Acquisition Act that is for a public purpose, they have certain criteria for the acquisition of property, and it tends to be any property once it meets certain criteria. I know one of the key ones is for it to be for a public purpose. So yes, and one of the things that they have to do, and it's protected in the Constitution as well, is to give fair compensation. So whoever the owners are, that they are found and they are given fair compensation. So I don't see why not. Once it's for a public purpose and fair compensation is paid to the owner of the property.
So Off the back of that question, Mr. Jessamy, I'm curious to know from you, do you believe that some of these historical buildings ought to be owned by the government in a strict sense?
Well, let me go back.
Yes.
We benefited from a process that started since the 1930s and then came forefront in 1960s by forming the National Trust. So Grenada is one of the oldest one, together with Barbados, and so in the Caribbean. So once these buildings are out there, they're not taken care of and so forth. That is where organizations like the National Trust, which was set up by law, Act number 20 of 1967, then they are given these kind of responsibilities of effecting some kind of management. So in Barbados, you have like open house. They have different programs in historic buildings in order to raise necessary income to help maintain and preserve them. In Grenada, we fall shy of that.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to read some of the comments because we have Angela Knight. Angela is from Barbados, and I think almost every Sunday she's always on and she comments. So she says, "Good evening from Barbados. What does your public health legislation say about them, or town and country planning legislation?" So, Rosana, you answered that a bit earlier. She also asks about environmental health legislation, may speak to the issue as well. Rosana, I see you shake your head.
We don't have environmental health legislation. You don't want me to start a rant about the lack of comprehensive environmental legislation. It's just piecemeal. We have pieces here in terms of the Solid Waste Authority. We have different, but we don't have a comprehensive environmental management act, like for instance, like Trinidad has and other places have. So no, we don't have a direct environmental legislation. So the two pieces that she identified, the public health and our equivalent of the Tongue and Planning or Physical Control Act, Physical Planning Act, are the two main ones that would cover that area, but no to the environmental health because it doesn't exist.
So I realize that you're very passionate about that particular point, Rosana. I just wanted to go a little bit more in that. Do you think that if it is that we had such an act in place, that, and not only had the act in place, but the act was, we were following the act as it is, and we were creating the bodies under the act, etc. You could just give me some more insight on what environmental health legislation would look like. Would we be in a better situation, particularly in relation to these dilapidated buildings? Or do you think that we would still be in the same space? I mean, in the perfect world.
Well, personally, I think the Physical Planning and Development Act is adequate in terms of we don't need an additional piece of legislation. So if we had an Environmental Health Act, it could focus on the other areas that need attention, that the dilapidated building structure. We have a very comprehensive, I consider it to be pretty comprehensive. My main critique, and it's perhaps a wider critique of the act, in terms of just the public, the ability of the public to lodge complaints and to interface with the authority itself. It leaves the onus on the authority to do it and not individuals who can just launch a complaint directly. So that would be my main critique. But in terms of the act itself, I would say it's fit for purpose and that there's not a need for any additional legislation. I don't think we have a law problem per se in Grenada. It's more an enforcement issue. In terms of that, going back to what Mr. Jessamy said, who will bail the cat? In terms of those difficult conversations, those uncomfortable things. And I think it's a wider discussion too in terms of a small island developing state, in terms of our priorities. We do have limited resources, no matter which government is in power. We have limited resources, and we tend to be focused a lot on bread and butter issues, the immediate things, the employment, the things that the electorate sees. But those other things are just either directly and indirectly not a priority. And as I keep saying, we are a very reactive society. So it's until a block falls on somebody, so until something happens, then we will react. So very reactive and not proactive in terms of, let's look around, let's see how we can avoid things. I think it's just the nature of the type of system we live in that, unfortunately, that happens. So I don't think the answer is more laws, per se.
But maybe sometimes too, we might ask ourselves whether we have missed the boat, because we had a golden opportunity to create what was started, in Grenada as a land agency. So all the various departments, putting in place, digitalizing all things like the legal laws, the entire the legal department with all the land deeds and conveyance and so forth, physical planning, and all these agencies under one land agency, so that we don't have all these problems. Sad to say, that project was not completed, and I think Grenada lost quite a lot of monies under that. So the whole issue of we say government is continuum. Sometimes you wonder whether things start and die with certain persons. So again, the whole about institution, it should not be a person, but we are not very good in recent years in forming proper institution. Even today, if you want to find your grandparents' death records or so, it is easier for you to go to Utah by the moments to do that. Just so if you go to the land registry to see the condition of the records there, you don't even want to open your eyes or your mouth, the state that they are in. So we are not doing the best of job. So if we have those things organized, then maybe too we can find out exactly who owns what, and then get on to the people who have abandoned the buildings, find out why it was abandoned, and see what can be done with them. But the institutional framework is something that we need. We need to attend and attack in Grenada. Everything is just done really, 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 really. You hear things, oh, we have a national park system. Sometimes we do not need resources from government because the funding can be raised externally. But the drivers to do that, you don't give them the kind of support. You know, we even had, like, for instance, the town of St. George. If you go back, it was twinned with many different countries, Guangdong province, and they asked you, what do you want? Up to today, So some kind of effort has to be made. People like me, so on the last leg out, but we need to inspire maybe a new generation to to really address those burning issues, because we will be in a real sad situation right now.
So
Yeah.
If I may, as Mr. Jessamy was speaking, I remembered a point in terms of perhaps why do we have so many dilapidated buildings, and I'm not speaking about the cultural ones, just like the regular ones. And I've heard people say about it. I do not know for sure. I myself have not tried to conduct any searches, but one of the things I constantly hear people say is that buying and selling buildings in town is a problem because the title to those properties are very complicated, because there isn't that culture of succession, of people doing wills. And so so the title, people die, they don't prepare wills, the property is tied up with multiple siblings who live all over the world. And so any sort of sale or transfer of property or ownership or tax payment is always a headache because of that lack of clarity on actually who owns. So instead of so it's difficult to settle, so they just abandon the property. So that's one of the things that I'm constantly hearing, how true it actually is. I personally haven't looked into it, but it's something I hear a lot. So in terms of how we could regularize title in an easier way, right now we know the whole Possessory Title Act being used for that. Is that what the Possessory Title Act is for? That's currently being considered by the Court of Appeal. So in terms of how can we regularize title so people can feel and become owners of property and take ownership, because they might not want to invest and fixing it when they know that there's somebody else who can appear and take claims. So I think that might be one of the underlying reasons why some of these buildings are abandoned.
Rosana, certainly that was an interesting point, and one that I didn't really think of, especially with the system of land ownership in Grenada, that is the unregistered system, and then you have to find this deed, that deed. And Mr. Jessamy rightfully said that the state of the land registry is one that leaves much to be desired. We do have a next question from Carlton Antoine, and he asks, how would a town council of citizens, organizations, private and public sector useful or helpful to address these issues in an integrated way based on best business practices. So,
All right.
how will they help with the dilapidated buildings, dilapidated historical sites? Go ahead, Mr. Destiny.
All right. Um, Sometimes there's a simple thing like a collapsed manhole in town of St. George. Just a manhole. And you have to run behind 10 different departments and everyone send it to another because we are yet to identify who is responsible. Someone say, oh, this something for everything is under Ministry of Works. But who in Ministry of Works? Is it the PS? Is it? So for years, we've been trying to streamline those kind of things. So you might say, oh, local government will cost so much money or town council. But maybe we just need a desk or two officers who has the responsibility to manage within, if it is the same physical planning or the Ministry of Works. That is absent. That is a nightmare. And even sometimes, a tongue, a tongue is evaluated by things like simple things. Do you have a museum? Amenities, walkways, sidewalks, theater, shopping area, and that gave a tongue a profile. And at
Green
times when
spaces.
green spaces, and that buffer zones and all things like that. And at times when you have to address the situation of Grenada, you can't make a note because all those things are absent. So we have to be very, very mindful as to how we go about how we plan, how we design, and those sort of things. Because I know that at times you have been offered grant money, but the questions they ask you, you can't answer it because the question might be who will continue or who are the other players in that. And simple things like we had monies to do sidewalks. All right. When the sidewalk is finished, who is responsible? We can't address that.
If I may, a minute, I think that the uh, the writer there is addressing the issue of local government,
Mm-hmm.
which is another issue in Grenada. There's a law in the
Mm-hmm.
book going back some 30 years, but nothing has been established.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what he's thinking fits with what Michael is saying. You have a simple problem, relatively simple, but you have to go to a minister to deal with it. They have these calling programs now that help, but I think he's addressing the issue of the absence of local government. And Rosana, if I may, I think that the difficulty in terms of transfer of property, I suspect that's the main problem for these dilapidated buildings, not only in St. George's, but around the island. Because when you have these multiple interests, as you know in our system, to transfer the interest, everybody had to, whoever interest in it had to convey it.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Sometimes generations, because we don't have the culture of making wills, and in particular before land became a commodity in about the last 30, 40 years. You had what they call family land, family
Mm-hmm.
house,
Mm-hmm.
and so. And when you go down 3, 4 generations, sometimes 30, 40 people have an interest in it. You really can't get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Indeed.
that's the major part, which raises the issue of the of land reform. I know it's something that Mr. Ferguson always speaks about, and but it raises that issue because, for example, as you know, there were these are dramatic changes in England in 1925, 100 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
to make it easier to transfer land, to transfer property. But we never received those changes, and we continued with the old system that goes back to about 18 something. And that is a problem. We see it with all these buildings, and more now you see it with abandoned lands.
Mm-hmm.
Because while before you had how the economy was structured before, you would have had the head of the family with a large part of a portion of land, and they hand it down to the eldest son, maybe, and the eldest son handed it down to the eldest son. But today, that eldest son is in America, not that it can never to return. So they don't bother about that. But tank was never passed, and that is a major problem. So you can imagine in the town where big money is involved, creates even more of a problem.
But just to sorry, go
But
go
I
ahead.
wanted to ask a question. Let me ask a question, and you can take a comment. If someone, an individual suffers a loss, like somebody get injured, damaged by one of these emanating from these dilapidated buildings, who is liable?
Well, it should be government. Because I've heard of people who have been driving the vehicle, went down in some kind of ditch, and they sue the government because it's their responsibility.
Rosana, you agree with that?
It
Well,
depends.
I'm thinking
Yes,
there's
right.
definitely negligence somewhere in terms of who has the duty of care. In terms of what's the first thing that came to mind is the same Physical Planning and Development Authority, because they have the implied duty to monitor, because they are supposed to inform the minister of dilapidated and ruinous buildings. So it appears that they have that duty of care to be inspecting and looking and so. But yeah, it's a broader question. Not to digress, but just the other day somebody was telling me they were driving and a breadfruit fell on their car and it broke their windscreen. It's like who is responsible? So sometimes it's not very simple in identifying. Even if
That's
you
true.
as a landowner, should you be keeping your breadfruit trees felled and away from the road? So it's not always a straightforward question in terms of who has a duty of care. But my immediate response, without doing any sort of research, would be the Physical Planning and Development Authority might be the entity, because they're supposed to ensure that that buildings are not ruinous, to use the word of the act.
What about the owners of the property?
Well, that too. So yeah, so my answer was more in respect of when you can't identify who the owner of the property is. But yeah, so as owners of property, and that's probably into like occupiers liability space, in terms of you have to ensure that the condition of your place is fit for human habitation, it's fit for anybody who comes onto your property or is in the vicinity of your property. So yeah, that general negligence, occupiers liability space. So in first instance, the owner, and if the owner cannot be found, there might be this broader thing with respect to the abandoned buildings that the Physical Planning and Development Authority could possibly be the one that didn't discharge their duty.
Rosana, I anticipated that you would have given the lawyerly answer, which you did. It really depends, because you cannot speak strictly, because the circumstances always shifts. So you never know what it has to be a fact, and then we could tell you from there what it is. Rosana,
that's why we have work.
yeah, lots of it too. I wanted to ask you, and you raised this issue earlier about possessory title. So what I wanted to speak about was the issue of persons residing in these abandoned properties or dilapidated buildings. What is the legal position in regards to them? Say that person was living in that dilapidated building for, and I'll be presumptuous, for the 12-year period required by the Possessory Title Act. Nobody has told them anything. The owner is away in the States. What happens then?
Well, based on our Possessory Title Act, they could potentially be able to apply and get a declaration of possessory title, because the basis of the act is to adversely possess, to dispossess the paper owner. So if you are there openly, freely, the neck V, neck clam, neck precario, openly, without force, without fear, you are there, no one has run you, you continue to occupy openly and freely for the statutory period of 12 years, and with the intention to act as owner. So, there's the physical and the mental requirement for possessory title. So you have the physical requirement of being there for 12 years and the mental requirement of acting as the owner of the property. Then once they meet the requirements of the act, that is, they get the two persons to do the affidavit, and they get the survey, and they do all those other things, they could potentially be successful. People tend to think that paying property tax would somehow give them a right, but even if they're not paying property tax, they can still dispossess the paper owner. So that's another thing. And the act as it currently is doesn't require you to be able to name the person. So if you're unable to name them, you don't know whose property you're dispossessing, you can still legally dispossess someone even if you're not aware who they are. So yeah, so that's a possibility. So an opportunity for people to to take hold of these abandoned buildings.
I think one of our, challenges in Grenada, if we look at, or if we compare to, let's say, Barbados, when Barbados carry out something, there's always some kind of legal aspect to it. In Grenada, sometimes you ask yourself, do we have town and country planning? Is there a national plan? Is there a national development plan? Because I know that like years ago, there was a plan to house 600 parking facilities down on the Carnage. And that had to be where we have the present basketball court. So the vehicles could access both from the Carnage and Scott Street and then go out on Hubbard Blaze Tyrrell Street. The plan was done. The monies were identified by UNDP. However, it was not carried out. One argument too was that car parking facilities sometimes it's a kind of haven for crime. All right, fine. So let us try to have activities both day and night. So you park there in a day or in the evening, but the same basketball court could go on top. So by the time you reach your fourth or fifth story, you are in sync with that straight line above. Apparently, the plan just mesmerized or disappeared, and maybe so too through budgetary support or allocation, maybe we lost it. It's likewise to when you look at the plan that was done between 79 and 83 for the entire Grandance area to as part of the whole airport development. It was, fantastic and phenomenal. And years after, like we just throw all those things, in a bucket, same or a garbage. So same thing with the land agency. Same thing with plans. Like I know there's a plan for the town of St. George in 1995, and interestingly enough, some other agencies got hold of those things, and bam, you see an aspect of the very plan that we knew came in on government books. So I don't know if it's policy, with the change or ever change. This person figured that that person what they're doing was not good. So then we need to come up with something new. And in most instances, we end up killing the goose that lays the golden egg. So the town of St. George has a serious, not space problem, but it's management. Years ago, you had plans to do two roads down the Archibald Avenue area to come down to Tantino. What happened to those things? Some aspects of it is still there, down by Fletcher Boys School and down by Mr. Prudhomme House. So we need to look at, those space, but I don't know, maybe various people, groups, organizations gotta come together and have some kind of cry, so that we can wake up. But we are not doing good.
Okay, so let's just recognize the sponsors at this juncture before we continue. Jail Professional Solutions Inc., Gem FM carried the program on FM station out of Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
All right. So after Hurricane Ivan, we also had a regeneration plan for the town of St. George. So you had about one big project, but within a big project, you had 34 other mini projects. So you had buildings that was identified, those that contributing. If those are not contributing, then you can give them a new life, revalorize them, and so forth. Um, and we had coming out of the Commonwealth someone called Dr. Holmes. He did a very nice report. We had the ARD and so forth. And in his, well, when he left Grenada, so all those things that were just thrown out of the out of the window. So you had buildings identified and spaces, a museum, St. James for George, government house, private houses that can be revalorized, how you can regentrification of the town of St. George, the facades, and so how we can improve traffic around the market square and all those kind of things. Restoration of the market.
Besides the tongue of St. George, any of the other tongues were identified? Because I think the
Granville.
problem of abandoned buildings go wider than just the tongue of St. George.
Granville was at another project called At the Water's Edge. TNC was involved again
Yeah,
too, and other agencies. Yeah, and again, the work has been done, but after the report has been drawn up, apparently, well, I guess that's the end of things.
I just want to ask Rosana a question. Is there the tax authorities in instances where there are no taxes being paid and all of this, as I suspect you have in many cases, uh, could tax measures, tax laws be used as also another lever in with regard to this problem?
Yes, so as far as I understand, the act does provide for that sale, in terms of, as once again, that debt mechanism, that properties where property tax hasn't been paid for, I don't remember the exact period of time, but there is that authority to sell for the payment of taxes. So that is another avenue. So as I said, it's not a law issue. There are different avenues that can be used to pursue. It's just
Enforcement is the problem.
Yeah.
One of the continuous themes that I've seen from the discussion so far this evening is the need for the proper bodies to be put in place and further for education. Mr. Jessamy, let me ask you, in your capacity, what have you done in terms of educating younger persons, perhaps, about these cultural sites so that there may be some interest in it for future generations? Because we don't want it to go with you. We want persons to have the same zeal and passion about preserving these sites. So, is there anything that normally happens? Is there a historical week? Do we go to schools? What do we do to bring awareness to this situation?
Well, I tried my best. I did projects. I brought students from all over the island. I raised monies to do sites around the island, like telescope. They was involved in places like the old church in Grenville, and but again, there were recommendations which we failed to adhere to. I had done things like starting Fort Matthew, the tricentennial celebration. Money has not been a problem. The problem over the years has been the political will. We have had US aid again who wanted to do restore the entire Fort George, do a new police station, all those things like that. So sometimes I don't want to hear education, boots on ground. So people like Andrew Bezinski, people like him I worked with for years, worked to create today what you call Kirani Boulevard. But through his instrumentality, we got a lady, Betty Frisbee, who used her pension money to create that place. Today, all kind of story. So there's some silent people there who, even Anya Braffett was one of the last managers of that space, raising monies. And we were even at almost at the doorstep of raising, getting funding to do the whole sidewalk or the whole Kirani James Boulevard area from the right on to all food land to stabilize all that waterfront as part of the environmental concerns and sea rising and so forth. So some work have been done. I don't like to say those things in public, but it is it is rather painful sometimes to see where we are at and diverse opportunities that we have had. So it's not just about a matter of educating, maybe educating not the population, not the local folks, but the people at the leadership level. Because when you look at historic districts in Havana, in Jamaica, the whole tourism industry in England is based on its history. Stratford upon Avon, Shakespeare Country, you name it. You wonder what exactly that we do when we go out there. As a politician said, maybe we wear contact lenses because so much can be done, and sometimes money is not the issue. It's just that the will. We pay lip service to those things.
I understand, Mr. Jessamy. So just action at this point in time. More than talk, just action at this point.
Well, at this point, I am I am on my retirement. I'm going home now. So so it's time to maybe do some writing. But all that level of advocacy, like I spent 3 years working at Fort Matthew. All the crazy people moved out, but I moved in. I spent 3 years working on Fort George, and that was just labor of love and hobbies. We can't get someone to do those kind of things today, but we need to, yes, we need to instill and inculcate in our younger folks, because all the thing we're talking about, we don't have a national dress, we have no monument for our heroes, we don't have, you name it, and you see all the other countries taking the very thing that we're kicking, and they're licking it, and they are making environment conservation, restoration. It makes sense, and it also makes money. Our tourism industry should be based on the St. George tongue as our first and foremost product. Up to now, you cannot even tell me what are our chief tourism products, not the hotels. What is Grenada's chief tourism product? Ask me, I don't know.
Mhm.
Again,
Go ahead, Mr.
no,
Layne.
I was going to say some people may disagree with him in terms of the focus of the tourism, but that's a separate issue
Mhm.
in terms of that, because as some people always remind me, St. George's is not Grenada, and even the tongue is not the tongue is not the parish of St. George's, because the problem we speaking about is really a problem. It is a Grenada problem, because you see it in all over the country. So we don't want to just confine it as to it is just a problem in St. George's.
Well, that is
But
true, but we have to.
in particular, just in the tongue of St. George's alone.
That's true, but you have to realize preservation costs. Preservation today has moved from preservation for preservation's sake to cost recovery, and one of the best area to recover that kind of expenditure is on St. George. How many shops can you go and get a t-shirt or a memorabilia, whether you want to say Fort Rupert or Fort George or whatever? How many places can you go and get some local souvenirs that really tells you this is Grenada? So as bad as you might say tourism is for cultural heritage, but that is one of the engines where we really generate money, and we are not doing a good job of it.
Okay. I have a next question, which I want to direct to Rosana, just to shift a bit. I know you said that the Physical Planning Act it lacks a procedure for the public to be complaints, right?
Yes, I didn't see it one.
Right. But is it possible for interested individuals and even more so interested community groups to bring action against the Physical Planning Authority to get them to do what they're supposed to do?
Yes. In fact, I was involved in a judicial review back in October where it was a community organization. They brought a claim against physical planning for not allowing them to go through the books. So in terms of they wanted to see some records, and the act is very clear that those records should be provided, and it wasn't done. So in terms of so that is an avenue, but we shouldn't have to get to that. It's an expensive and time-consuming process to have to engage in judicial review. So ideally, we want to leave that as the very, very last resort, but there is that option, but it is an expensive and time-consuming option that isn't available to many. And also, in terms of the Property Tax Act, I went back and just took a look because I couldn't tell you how long. If you don't pay tax for this, it's 2 years. Then you can they can sell. There's the power of sale under the Property Tax Act. So lots and lots of avenues. So hopefully you don't have to go to litigation. But if the bodies that we do not do what they're supposed to do, there is that option of litigation.
Ultimately.
Rosana, thank you so much for that. I think that was very important for our viewers because I sometimes suspect persons look at taxes as more of a burden than anything else and neglect to pay it. And if it is that the authorities were ready to act within the powers granted to them, a lot of people may be homeless.
Just 2 years and they can auction your property, but I haven't seen that happen.
But in particular for the dilapidated and abandoned buildings, I think, because again, it makes it easy because it could deal with a title issue. Although the government will have I guess an obligation to before they sell to notify all those who have an interest in the property. I don't know, but so it can still be a nightmare. And you can get a lot of litigation, but that might cause people to pay up and to look after the property.
Yeah, and to regularize themselves. For example, earlier in the program, you mentioned that environmental issues are twofold. So they're green issues and they're brown issues. And in respect to the dilapidated buildings, we're dealing with brown issues. What I want to know, what I'm curious about as an environmental lawyer, what issues under the brown umbrella affect the green umbrella, particularly with this dilapidated building? What are the green environmental effects of the dilapidated buildings? How do they affect the environment?
So the first thing that came to mind is depends on, like, for instance, what is in those dilapidated buildings. So let's say like they have like a fridge or those kind of things that have refrigerants. Those are called like ozone depleting substances, like if they're not properly disposed of. So you speak about white waste and the proper disposal of white waste. So that sort of thing. So that was like the first thing that came to mind in terms of proper disposal of things. Like you have like computers, like different e-waste, like just things that are toxic to the environment that are not properly disposed of in those buildings, getting water and perhaps getting into the atmosphere, escaping into the atmosphere. So that's one of the things that came to mind. So it's more sanitation issues in terms of on the public health side that it can affect things, maybe getting into groundwater, those chemicals, because those buildings are abandoned. So those are just a few of the things that just came to mind immediately, but I'm sure upon further reflection, there are several more. But those are just what jumped out right now.
Thank you.
The need for records and inventory is so important. Even as we go forward, even as we plan. So, like for instance, take for instance a fire service. The fire service should know each and every single building within the town of St. George, its state, its condition, the access. So there's supposed to be a link between physical planning and the fire department. So in the event of an emergency, it's there. So maybe as we go forward, we can have some kind of system where, that record, they can, access it or get into it and so forth. So we have a lot of work to do.
Mr. Jessamy, can you give me an example of any of these dilapidated buildings that have been restored for, cultural significance or cultural importance?
Well, I will not say cultural importance, but you can look at, like, for instance, that building on Melville Street where you have, you have a number of them there. You have the NIS building, you have the Granby building, On the Carnage, you have the whole financial complex together with Hubbard's. You have that building on Melville Street where you have one of the financial companies, and look at you. We have an upscale version of some historical element like Bruce Street Mall or the Republic Bank building. So you can use the old styles to bring out the real character of places. We have in Jamaica, Old and New Kingston. In St. Lucia, you have a lot of the Georgian, architectural styles retained, and it lifts the whole man-made as-built environment. We lost places like Reno Cinema, and so Marshall House is not looking too bad. So but the thing is, it is really done based on people's persuasion, and that is the challenge. There's nothing that say, "Hey, these are the guidelines." So you pass by the tunnel, and you see the museum building, which supposed to be one of creme a la creme from 1704, but you see the whole outside filled with AC ducts and AC units and color schemes. You know, are we following nice pastel colors, light colors, and all those kind of things, so that to make the place, alive.
You understand, Mr. Jessamy. I know that certainly from this discussion this evening, I know that you're very passionate about the historical buildings in Grenada. Given that this evening is Father's Day, we want to have you go and enjoy yourself as a father, as a grandfather perhaps, and Mr. Layne as well. We will just now wrap up the show. So what I'll do is, ladies first, as is customary. Rosana, final comments, closing comments before we end the show this evening.
Okay, so just repeating some of what I said, that I don't believe that the issue in terms of addressing dilapidated buildings in Grenada, both of cultural significance and non-cultural significance, is a law issue in terms of our legal issue, that we're lacking the laws. We have at least 3 different pieces of legislation that we can use to address it. So we have the Physical Planning and Development Act, we have the Public Health Act, we have the Property Tax Act. So there are different mechanisms that can be used. It's a matter of enforcement and not to take from Mr. Jessamy, but the political will to pursue these issues. So it's not a legal issue. We have enough law. What we need is enforcement.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosana. Mr. Jessamy, any final comments?
Well, I'm leaving not to go and enjoy, but to go and pack my bag to head for Carriacou tomorrow. We are going to have a 2-day workshop, again, dealing with the tangible heritage, preservation of the heritage. Carriacou, that's supposed to be a Caribbean gem. Again, so much to be done there. We have not really been addressing Carriacou. It is one of the places that has been identified as a possible World Heritage Site. So, as in Spanish, you say, la lucha continua. So the fight continues, yes. So I'll still try to do the best as I can.
Mr. Layne, any closing words from you tonight?
No. Just to thank the guests and to thank all those who are following. That's all for me.
Okay, great. I would just like to say on behalf of myself and Mr. Layne, thank you, Rosana. Thank you, Mr. Jessamy, both for joining us this evening. Your feedback has been valuable. I know our viewers certainly enjoyed the show this evening. And I'd like to wish you all a pleasant Sunday evening. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week Sunday as we continue Legalize.
All right, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.